remind you that this planning meeting is being broadcast live over the internet, so there is no need for any other filming of the meeting to take place. This meeting is available to view online now and in the future. Committee members, please be aware that we are all on camera and you may be visible on screen when people around you are speaking, and please remember to speak clearly into your microphones. We welcome the use of the Welsh language at meetings. I have had no request for people to speak Welsh today, so this meeting will be conducted in English only. Please can all mobile phones and other noisy devices be put on silent? And if there is an emergency alarm, please follow the green signs and go to the ground floor of the Civic car park. Thank you. I'd like to start by welcoming Rachel Jowett, who is the Chief Officer, Neighbourhood Services, Planning and Public Protection. And I'd like to ask all the officers now to introduce themselves. And we'll start with Tim, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm the legal officer representing the Council and Advising Committee today, Tim James.
Rachel Beale, Senior Business Support Officer.
Hello, I'm Richard Lewis, the Head of Planning and Development.
I'm Paul Wielder and I'm Group Leader, Highway Development.
Claire Hall, Senior Planner.
Craig Mead, Planning Policy Officer.
Helen Smith, Principal Planner, Development Management.
Norman Jones, Team Leader, Development Management.
Rob Murray, Principal Planning Officer, Planning Policy.
Thank you. Right, we'll start with agenda item 1, attendance. If you'd all sign the register in the usual way, please, and pass it on. Apologies, Rachel?
Yes, we have apologies from Councillors Sue Marson and Ron Burnett.
Thank you. Item 2, declarations of interest. Over to Tim James for advice.
Thank you, Chair. Can I remind all members that where they do have any declarations, they should note those in the appropriate place within the attendance register folder, which is being passed around the chamber. Number of declarations I'm aware of, Chair. Firstly, yourself, in relation to items 8 and 9 on the agenda, both applications where Pontypool Community Council were a consultee. For that reason, I understand you wish to declare personal but non-prejudicial interest in relation to both those applications, Chair. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Thank you, Chair. And then Councillor Gaynor James, in relation to the same two matters, 8 and 9 on the agenda today, again, as a consultee, as a member of Pontypool Community Council who were consulted, do you wish to declare personal but non-prejudicial interests in relation to those matters?
That's correct.
Thank you, Councillor James. Councillor Overton, again in relation to items 8 and 9 on the agenda, again as a member of Pontypool Community Council, I anticipate you wish to declare personal but non-prejudicial interests in relation to both those items. Is that correct, please, Councillor Overton?
Yes, that is correct.
Thank you, Councillor Overton. Councillor Ashley, in relation to items 11 and 12 on the agenda, these are both items where Cwmbran Community Council were consultees, and as a member of that Community Council, I understand you will wish to declare personal but non-prejudicial interests. Is that correct, Councillor Ashley?
That is. I'm also the ward member for those areas as well.
Right. Well, my advice would be you don't declare any interest as a ward member, but purely as a member of the community councils would be my view.
Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Ashley. And then Councillor Fay Jones. Councillor Fay Jones, items 11 and 12 on the agenda. In both cases, Cwmbran Community Council were consultees, and on that basis I understand you wish to declare personal but non-prejudicial interest. Is that correct?
That's correct, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. Any other questions from members in relation to interests at the moment, please? Okay, thank you, members. Thank you, Chair.
Could I just ask who you are, please? Probably. Yes, in the public gallery, please. Thank you. Thank you, Tim. Thank you. We go to item agenda 3. Minutes of the meeting of the Planning Committee held on Tuesday, 21st of November, and it's on pages 5 to 12. We'll do accuracy first. Do the committee wish me to go through it? Or have you read it and are you all satisfied it's accurate? Could I have a show of hands? Someone move it, please. Thank you. Seconder? And a show of hands? Right. Are there any questions or comments on this report? No? Okay, then we'll move on. Item 4. Item 4 is an appeal and is for information for the committee to note. And the application number was 16/P01403. An appeal against refusal of application to convert 2-storey house into 2 individual flats and driveway. And it was cited at 50 Wayne Road, Cwmbran, Torfaen. Any questions or comments from the committee? No? You wish to note them? Can I have a show of hands, please? Thank you. Item 5, it's another appeal, and this is application number was 16P01409, and the appeal against refusal of retrospective application to retain the extension of residential curtilage and retention of 3 outbuildings, cited at 19 Ashley Court, Hentless, Cwmbran, Torfaen. This appeal was allowed. Are there any comments from the committee? You wish to note them? Can I have a show of hands? Thank you. Agenda item 6, and this is another appeal. The application number was 17/P0064, and the appeal against grant of a planning permission to erect a retaining rear boundary wall subject to conditions, cited at 47 Thornhill Close, Upper Cwmbran, and this appeal was allowed. Are there any questions, comments from committee? No? You wish to note them? Can I have a show of hands, please? Thank you. Agenda item 7. This is a planning appeal, and this was to inform members of planning appeals which have been made to the Welsh Assembly Government and the subsequent determination. Right. This appeal was by Mr Dan Stacey against the Council's failure to give notice within the prescribed period for alteration / extension of existing dwelling, construction of new raised patio and retention of double garage. This appeal was allowed with conditions. Committee note the report again. Any questions, comments? Will we have a show of hands? No? You're all satisfied? Thank you. Agenda item 8. This is a planning application, and it's number 17P0162. The proposal is erection of a Class A1 food store, approximately 1,804 square metres gross floor area, associated access and car parking, and landscaping together with the replacement car park for the existing industrial building sited at former Trico Schoolfields roundabout, Pontypool. And this is on pages 43 to 88. And there was a site inspection on the 27th of June. And the Planning Officer Claire Hall now will give us a presentation. Thank you, Claire.
Thank you, Chair. Before I do that, just a couple of updates to tell you about late representations received since the report went to print. I think members will already be aware of a briefing note that was circulated by the applicants yesterday because they weren't able to speak, so they sent a written briefing note which I think has been circulated to all members. They have asked officers to point out that Welsh Government have not objected to the proposals, and that's, you'll see Welsh Government's position stated on page 60 of the agenda. We've had, in response to the letter drop that was done by Aldi's reference in the report since it went to print last week, we've received another 165 letters of support. No new issues other than the following. These are just new issues that haven't already been reported, comments that haven't already been reported in the written report to you. They've said development is currently unused, it's a brownfield site. They've queried whether the roundabout will need traffic signals to cope at certain times of the day. They are concerned that Tesco's are afraid of the competition. And they've requested a footpath on the bypass to get there from the McDonald's roundabout. The other late representation we've received is from Asda's. Again, I think that's been circulated to all planning committee members in response to the briefing note that the applicant sent you yesterday. That's it, no other changes to the report, Chair. This is the application site. So this is the roundabout with McDonald's and KFC and Pontypool West, whatever it's called these days, the hotel on this side, Harvester here. So that layout, so the store would be just going across here. So that sort of turned slightly. So again, the access off the roundabout, Pontypool's over this way, Cumbra's down here. And the proposed building is being built at the northern end of the site. There's some elevations of the drawing. So there's a glass sort of frontage to the main public facade as you approach from the roundabout. Sorry, the quality's not great here, but this is the proposed footpath link that is referred to in the report that Aldi are proposing at the back of the site. So it's behind the existing buildings here to link back through to Sunnybank Road and Griffithstown. And again, this is a plan submitted by the applicant. The site, sorry, it's not the quality's not the best. The site is in here. It's just showing the public transport nodes, bus stops, train stations. Pontypool Town Centre is up in this corner here. This is the application site. Ooh. What's going on? I was going to say this. Sorry, okay. Again, apologies for the quality of these photographs, but these are photographs submitted by the applicants just to show the other sites that have been subject of their search. I thought it would be just useful for members to sort of see those in context. So the blue line here is Pontypool Town Centre. Okay, these red lines are the various sites that the applicants have looked at, and the site in yellow here is the application site. So the existing, it's the existing car park serving the industrial occupiers that is proposed to be built on, and that's a view looking north towards the rugby field, which is owned by the council but on a long-term lease to the rugby club, but is obviously referenced in the report in terms of connectivity. The replacement car park is proposed to the front of the existing building, so taking away the existing landscaped areas to provide replacement car parking to serve industrial units to facilitate the space for the retail store on the existing car park. I'll take any questions.
Are there any questions, comments? Hugh?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I've got a couple, actually. Why was this particular site chosen above the others that were highlighted? And a couple of things in the report. There seem to be concerns over access for people without vehicles. And finally, as we're trying to promote a cleaner and greener borough, we've had a oversight and scrutiny committee meeting within the last week, which highlighted the fact that we've seen a decline in the tree population by 1.2% over a 3-year period. And with this particular application, it does include cutting down quite a significant number of trees. Whilst it may not be possible for replanting on this particular site, could we not impose perhaps a 106 agreement for tree replacement at another alternative suitable site? Thank you.
Right, who wants to answer that? Claire?
Thank you, Chair. I'll let my colleague answer on the site selection question, your first one, but on the other points. In terms of the accessibility on foot, you'll see from the report that our highways officer and indeed planning officers have expressed concern about the site's remoteness from existing pedestrian linkages. The applicant are proposing to provide a new footpath link, but that is subject to off-site negotiations with a landowner or landowners. So it's not definite at this moment in time, but that is certainly something that they have been looking to secure. But I think it's fair to say, from your officer's point of view, it is the lack of pedestrian linkages to the town centre that is one of the issues of concern, which has led to the recommendation in the report. In terms of the loss of the trees, I wouldn't say that there's a substantial tree loss here. I think there is a loss of sort of the ornamental landscaped elements that were obviously part of the original industrial development, but there are no proposals to touch the main tree belt, as I would call it, which screens the site from the trunk road and the A472. So yes, there will be some loss of some green infrastructure, if you like, within the site itself, but our landscape and tree officers and ecologists raise no objection to their soft landscaping proposals, and I dare say the applicant would be amenable to any off-site mitigation that the council felt was appropriate. But I don't think your officers have strong concerns about the loss of greenery, if I can put it that way, in this case. And Craig can answer on this side.
Yeah, in terms of site selection, national planning policy for retail and the council's policy for retail is that you need to do a site selection which starts with sites within the town centre boundary. If there's nothing suitable, available and viable there, you can look at edge of centre sites, again the same tests, before you can look at outer centre sites. The applicant came to us with some suggestions they'd already looked at, such as the former Trebethyn Comprehensive School, which obviously is a housing site, the gas sports site, which obviously is our car park, and a few other sites around the town, looking at Blaenavon as well, I think some in Cwmbran. And in part of the application, we identified some additional sites they should look at, which was the part of the Mileage development that's been proposed. There's a retail centre being proposed there, and also got them to look at the former court building in Pontypool Town Centre and the office building there adjacent to Riverside Car Park. The applicants and have ruled out those sites before they'd submitted certain sites and have considered the two suggested by the council. They've ruled out the mileage development as they think the store of this nature would be too big and for the development would cause too much problems in terms of retail impact. They haven't approached the landowner themselves to discuss whether the landowner would be willing to accommodate their proposal on their site. From the council's perspective and the council's retail agents, that's something that is suitable and should be investigated. And the other one investigated was the former court building, which they've identified as being too small. It would require the use of Riverside Car Park. Also, the council would need to negotiate with that if it was suitable. But they've identified it isn't available for the development, and I think the former Pensure industrial building has recently been let, so it's not available in that sense. The applicant haven't approached the council's asset management team, so the onus of proof is on the applicants to identify sites. It's not for the authority to suggest hundreds and hundreds of sites. We suggested a few. They've ruled the one out. The other one, I don't think they've gone to the full degree to rule out Mamilid without speaking to the applicant, but in their view, this is the best site for their proposal. But obviously, as the report identifies, there's other issues in terms of impact on Pontypool Town Centre and other issues that we need to take account of as a whole rather than just site selection.
Are you satisfied with those answers, Hugh?
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Right, thank you. Neil?
On the highway safety, I noticed on the highway safety, we know that the roundabout has been problematic ever since it was built with regards to traffic. But when you consider that Trico were in there for a number of years with over 300 people every day working there, and they weren't all going by vehicles, there was a lot of people walking. And I just can't see the issues around here. I know it's a busy place, but when we go down to Cwmbran, in Cwmbran Town Centre, we got Morrison's, we got 5 or 6 stores all the way around, where lights are there controlling some of the traffic flow, and I can't really agree with the recommendation with the access. I think the access they are prepared to put an access in there, and on the other side of it again. There could be 40 local jobs for people, and I think we should be looking at that again. Yeah. Thank you, Chair.
Would the Highways Officer like to come in on that? Thank you, Paul.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Perhaps I'd like to refer members to my comments on this proposal on pages 52, 53 and 54 of the report. Where there are 3 pages of, I would say, reasons as to why I think that this is not a sustainable location for pedestrians to this particular site. I haven't raised an issue with vehicular access to this particular site. It is mainly about access for people other than people in cars. There are a number of pedestrian routes to this site, and none of them are particularly good. There's an access that could be provided along the football field up to the canal, and it's up a significant gradient. And then there's a huge viaduct then that leads up to the canal, up to the cycle track. Then you've got the actual trunk road roundabout itself, and the pedestrian routes across that roundabout from the hotel to this particular store, whereby people may be in the hotel and they may choose to go across to the store to do some shopping. So all in all, as you can see from my comments, I'm not happy at all about other routes to this particular site. Notwithstanding that the TA that was submitted with this application did not raise significant issue with traffic issues, and neither have I. Members will be aware that there is congestion at this particular site. Likewise, there is congestion throughout the borough on peak traffic locations throughout the borough at peak times. I don't think I would compare this to a town centre facility within Cwmbran Town Centre itself, because you've always got good bus linkages into Cwmbran town centre, you've got good cycle routes, you've got good pedestrian routes, you've got traffic signal crossings, you have got congestion, which I would expect in a town centre area, but this is an island site in the middle of, basically in the middle of an island. They're surrounded by attractors, which could be the hotel, and surrounding areas which haven't got good pedestrian links to this development. So, while I would concur that vehicular access isn't a real issue for me, it is for routes other than vehicular access that I'm concerned about. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Paul. Is that okay, Neil?
No, I am disappointed, Chair, because that factory was working there for years, with, like I say, with 300 odd people going there day and night, mornings, afternoons and evenings, and I really can't, I think they've exaggerated the issues. I honestly believe it. We badly need some investment in Pontypool. We've got Tesco's and that's what we've got here, and there's an opportunity to have another 40 jobs, and I think we should go the extra mile just to make sure that this place comes there.
Well said.
Right, okay. Claire will answer this, I believe. Oh,
in
Craig,
terms
is it?
of investment in Pontypool, this obviously is an outer centre site in retail planning policy terms, not town centre or edge of centre. In terms of walking distances, the walking distances to Pontypool town centre takes up to 22 minutes with shopping. On foot, are people going to be doing that or getting in their car and driving home and rather than using Pontypool town centre? In terms of impact on Pontypool town centre, we've identified that, or our consultants have identified the impact on the convenience, sort of Tesco's, Iceland, farm foods, those type of retailers is 14% and 11% across the town centre in whole. That is a big impact on the town centre. So there may be jobs created on the Aldi site that may result in job losses in the Pontypool town centre due to the impact this proposal will have on the town centre. So you need to balance that. And in terms of jobs, they've identified it's 28 full-time equivalent jobs rather than 40 full-time jobs. But you need to balance the impact on Pontypool town centre potential job losses against the job losses or the jobs being created on this site. And in terms of the walking distances, this would be a car-borne site for development, which Paul's identified from a highway safety issue. Paul's responded there. But in terms of people using the town centre and walking, I think this is just going to be used by car rather than people using it on foot from the surrounding communities and doing linked shopping trips with Pontypool town centre.
Sorry, Chair, if I can just add to that as well. There's been an overwhelming response, obviously, in terms of letters of support that we've received in the office. But quite coincidentally, quite a lot of those are saying that they welcome it because they won't have to drive to Cwmbran, they can just drive here instead. So again, it reaffirms our position is that this will be for car-borne single-trip users, not multi-trip, transport mode users, which a better site nearer or on the edge of Pontypool town centre would have the ability to deliver that, whereas this site, we feel, would not. It would be primarily used by single-trip purpose visitors by car and not necessarily of wider benefit to the other businesses in Pontypool.
Thank you. Is that okay, Neil? Yeah? Stuart next.
As somebody who has been involved with the people doing the Cwmbran stuff in regards to redesigning some of the stuff, I was going to ask the questions around the travel to work, pedestrian and stuff like that. Roughly 40% of the population in this borough do not use cars. And looking at that site when I was down there, my big question was, how the hell do you get in there? Now, if you go down there any day, you will see people going to the other side of it, walking up the side of that motorway, up the side of that roadway. It is extremely dangerous. I mean, I've done it myself, to be honest. The only other way of accessing that site to go to the offices over there is to go down the canal, and that is extremely dangerous, especially if we were trying it last week with the ice around. There is a footpath in to the other side, or you go in the edge of that football field, which you can do. Any ice or anything like that, you're likely to end up in Avonlwyd because the river goes down underneath there as well. It's an extremely hazardous site, And I just question about this 40% of people in this area want to access that site without car or public transport. That is the other one, and people hear me banging on about it. The other active travel also involves bicycles. How you get a bike up there, I wouldn't want to cycle up there. I know some people do, but there's no mention whatsoever here of active travel. There's no cycleway into it, and no cycleway even suggested. So there's one for you. So I question this as well. I mean, the preferred thing, and if you talk to the experts at the council about it, is some form of bridge, totally segregated way for both pedestrians. So no suggestion whatsoever here of that. And then, I mean, if you use the Cwmbran stores like this, Lidl and Aldi, they actually have availability for taxis. Now, that's another question. If you were using it as a non-driving person, you want taxis. I don't see a suggestion there. We sat on the site, and what the officer was suggesting there about it's solely and only for people with cars. Now, that worries me, and I understand that people want alternative stores. But this just seems totally the wrong site. I mean, and then the major question in here I read as well is about the canal, proximity to the canal, danger of flooding, etc., etc. There seems to be quite a lot in here about canals. Then also about the environment, which is rather unique. We haven't touched that one either. There's quite unique environment there, and putting that store in there, which will change it. I know there was a factory in there, but it was quite inconspicuous, that factory. Once you start introducing a massive great car park in there, you change the whole nature of that area as well. I'll just make those observations. Somebody answer that one if they would, please.
Would you like an answer?
Yes, please.
Claire, would you like to answer that?
I mean, I think most of your concerns are already identified in the report. I think it's fair to say that the applicants have been willing to look at proposing new linkages and improvements where that is feasible. So if it was an issue of there's too much emphasis on pedestrians and not enough on cyclists, I'm sure the applicants would be amenable to looking at that if that was the only issue. And similarly, a taxi rank, all of those issues are potentially within the gift of the applicant to deliver. But I think it comes back to, from a sustainable development point of view, both national and local planning policy is trying to reduce reliance on the private car, and we as officers feel that this site is not the right one for a retail store, not only because of its inaccessibility from non-car passengers, but crucially because of the impact that would have in the longer term on Pontypool Town Centre. I think we would very much like to welcome Aldi to Pontypool, but we don't feel that this site is the best one for it.
Thank you. Is that okay, Stuart? The next on the list is Gaynor.
Yes, I'd just like to put my comments in that every Aldi's car park you go in is chock-a-block. So that says to me, people that go there, drive there. I can walk to Tesco's from where I live, but I don't walk there, I drive there because I can't carry the shopping. So I would say that the people that will go to Aldi's drive. They go to Asda, they drive. They go to Morrison's, they drive. They drive to fill the boots of their car up. And I'd just like to say as well that it won't affect the town because Iceland, completely different thing. It's a frozen food store. They provide delivery for people that hasn't got a car. Everybody that goes into the town, they walk into, they get on a bus. They can't do loads and loads of shopping because they got on again the bus to go back. So they are your walkers. The people have got their cars. They've had 95% of Pontypool people wanting this supermarket. And you've had a complaint from Tesco's, well, that's obvious. No matter who is it, Tesco's doesn't want it to happen. So, to me, I think it'd be a bit let down to the people of Pontypool if we don't let this happen. Thank you.
Gaynor, you're not thinking about the people who don't have cars. They can't access this.
Yeah, sorry,
they can't access this.
No, they can't. But
they can't.
No, but they can still shop in Tesco's. But what I'm saying is, the people that can't drive still got somewhere to shop. The people that can drive will have an option to where they want to go. If they haven't got a car, they haven't got a car. They can still shop in Tesco's on the bus.
I think that's a little bit illogical to me, but I let it go. Does any officer want to answer that? Claire? Yeah.
Sorry, I do have to point out just something as a matter of fact. Tesco's have not made representation on this application, so we need to make that clear that Tesco's have not made representation on the application. The potential impact on Tesco's has been identified in the report, and we don't think that's necessarily an issue. It's the wider town centre. I think Craig wanted to make a point.
Yeah, in terms of impact, the retail consultants the council employed, even Aldi's own consultants, have identified there will be an impact on Pontypool. They obviously think the impact in Pontypool retailers will be less than our consultants. But there will be an impact on the retailers of Pontypool. In terms of Tesco's, yes, they haven't objected. They do attract people to the town centre. They in fact are attracting people that are doing link trips as well. So if those people don't go to Tesco's and go to Aldi's, they're going to be lost to the town centre of Pontypool. And in terms of the point about the 95% of residents in Pontypool want Aldi's in there, the applicant sent out 8,000 letters. They had just under 2,000 responses, and 95% of those wanted it. So it isn't 97% of the town. It was only 95% of the people that responded to Aldi's letter that supported. Yeah, so it's not the town hall, only people that responded to the applicant's letter. But there will be an impact on Pontypool, whether it's the extent the Aldi's think or the extent of our retail consultants think. There will be an impact on the retailers in Pontypool Town Centre as a result of this application.
Next.
Thank you, Chair. This council has already encouraged pedestrians to the site by having McDonald's, KFC, and other retail food outlets that I know far too well, encouraging people to walk the site already. And I think what we have in this application is an opportunity to improve the pedestrian safety on site and work with a company as large and as popular as Aldi to ensure that the linkages between the walkways, the canalways, etc., are improved to a point where overall, throughout that whole site, the pedestrian safety is increased. My second point is on the loss of the industrial space, which seems to be one of the biggest reasons for rejection. From my understanding, we're not actually losing a lot of that industrial space. It's a new building that's being built on the end of the current Trico site. So does this application not increase the mix of industrial employment space? And appreciate if the planning officer could comment.
You can answer this. Thank you.
I think in terms of opportunities to improve off-site linkages, the applicants are very amenable to that. Though to date, no firm proposals other than a potential link at the back of the site has been put forward. Certainly, I'm not party to any what I would call major infrastructure improvements in terms of pedestrian footbridges over the carriageway or anything. I think Welsh Government obviously are the Highway Authority for the Trunk Road. I think they've been speaking to the applicants separately about their requirements. But in principle, that is not something that needs to be ruled out. That's certainly something that can be looked at. I'm a bit confused about the comment on whether this increases the mix of industrial. This wouldn't increase. This would involve a retail development on an industrial car park. So the issue it's not a major reason for refusal. I think it's down the pecking order, if I can put it that way, in terms of the recommendation that's before you. And certainly, I think from your office's point of view, if the site was more sustainably located in a way that didn't have an impact on Pontypool Town Centre, then the loss of industrial land per se wouldn't be a reason for withholding consent. It's just in this case, it is a site that is very well located for communication links for industrial occupiers, and there's an issue as to why the site is not being brought forward to meet the expansion plans of the existing industrial occupiers. You'll notice one of whom has objected to this development and on the potential conflict a retail use would bring with his existing operation and how that might threaten his long-term availability on that site. So it's not it is an issue. I wouldn't say it's the major issue, but certainly it's not increasing the industrial supply. It's actually taking away the opportunity for that site to be used for an industrial occupier if a retail use was allowed on it.
Right, I'm going to bring the Highways officer in now. Paul, please.
Thank you, Chair. Could I just answer the question from Councillor regarding the McDonald's site, which is on the opposite side of the road to this proposal. That was set up by Welsh Government, that particular site, as a service station area which you would expect along the trunk road network. It was set up many years ago, and it's sort of developed now into a McDonald's, a KFC, plus a hotel, but it was always seen as a petrol filling station, and it was seen as an essential part of the network where you would have a service station adjacent to the network. Now, notwithstanding that comment, this particular service station, i.e. the McDonald's place, I have always been concerned about the pedestrian access to that particular development. Not long ago, there was a child pedestrian personal injury accident at that particular location, with people crossing a couple of lanes of the trunk road to get to McDonald's from Pontypool Town Centre. Now, I can understand the ethos of that being a service station, but that in itself does not sometimes make it acceptable for pedestrian access to those developments, particularly now if this proposal is given approval. The additional pedestrian movements that might take place across that trunk road to get from the hotel development across possibly to the Aldi development. So even though it is set up as a service station per se, there are people and children from Pontypool Town Centre that travel along that highway and cross those lanes of highway to get to McDonald's. I'm not happy about that, but nevertheless that's the way it is. But this development, my view is regarding the pedestrian and other links to this particular development, when Welsh Government guidance and policy is all about sustainability and good access to developments for other mechanisms other than the car. My advice is that as a highway officer, I'm not happy with the pedestrian links to this particular site, either from the existing development over the other side of the road and to this new development. And as you can see from the report, I do not consider that the pedestrian accessibility distances of 1,900 metres from Pontypool Town Centre, 1,000 metres to Griffithstown, 1,600 metres to the Highway New Inn, 1,600 metres to Pontypool New Inn Station are acceptable in sustainability terms. And the applicant has not demonstrated that those particular links can be made up to a suitable standard for people to use. That is my view, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Who next?
Thank you, Chair, for permitting me to come back in. The first stage was really asking questions. As you know, we are supposed to come to these meetings with impartial views on it. But having listened to the comments that have been made by my colleagues on the planning committee, I normally do support council officers in their recommendations, But I think in this case, I'm inclined to go against the recommendation in the report. I think when we speak in terms of the recommendations in term, we look at the size, the scale, the type and the location that the impact is going to have on Pontypool town centre. Well, where were those considerations when Tesco's was given permission to go ahead and build? Surely that store up there has had the biggest impact on the town centre, and far more than this. If we adopt this, yes, okay, there's an issue with pedestrians and sustainability, but I think if you look at a lot of Aldi and Lidl stores, they're doing very well because they give residents a choice to be able to buy their main provisions at a lower cost. It's the fact that pedestrians can't access it. Well, pedestrians can still access the facilities within the indoor market within Pontypool town centre, where all that money's been spent on doing that up. When it says about not satisfactorily demonstrated a preferable approach to site selection, it seems the applicant has been quite flexible on site selection. And in terms of sustainability and ever going forwards, one of the things that we've been criticised for in the past as a council is the lack of new developments going on brownfield sites. All the new developments seem to be going on greenfield sites. And I know that this represents a change of use from industrial to retail. However, it's still a new development on a brownfield site, and I think it's to be applauded for that. One of the conditions, one of the things as well in the report is how viable this is going to be going forward. And really, that I feel that is an issue for the superstore to determine themselves. They've got expertise in this area in siting stores. And they must have a model that they use for determining the commercial viability of this particular site. I think the fact that we're saying that perhaps 80% of people will travel there by car is probably not that dissimilar to other stores that we would see within the area. And finally, on the point of employment market, I mean, it's to be welcome because it's attracting new business into the area, and it will create more jobs. So I'm sorry, but on this particular occasion, I'm minded to go against the officer's recommendations in the report for the reasons stated. Thank you.
Right. Do any officer? Yes. Richard will come.
Just to address some of that. I think what you're getting, officers are saying that we are not objecting to an Aldi store coming to Pontypool. We'd very much welcome working with them to bring a store to Pontypool. It's simply the location of this store. You've heard from the highways officer about the potential dangers, and then the impact on the town centre is something that's very concerning. We caution members in terms of looking at the policies. The development plan policies are very clear in terms of where we cite retail development. You've heard about the sequential test where we go into the town centres first. The impact on the town centres, these are policies that we've exercised for many, many years, I think quite successfully. The concern is Pontypool is still in a very fragile state, and we've taken external professional advice on that from a retail consultant who are advising us that it will have an impact on the town centre. So when members do make their decision, please be aware that if you look at the reasons that we are recommending for refusal, there are a number of references to policies in the approved local development plan that we have been operating for many years. I just ask members to take those into consideration. Thank you, Chair.
Now I've got a list of people. Lenny next on my list.
Thank you, Chair. Most of the points I wanted to cover have been covered, but I think if we miss this opportunity for a second store in the north of the borough, it'll be the biggest mistake this committee ever made. Thank you.
Steve's on my list next. Thank you.
Right. The way I'm looking at it, objectively,
I think the stall is more there for the passing commuting traffic.
It is, yeah.
The commute from Usk, Abergavenny, Newport, Cwmbran, or any of the valleys that doesn't even go into Pontypool.
Yeah.
And perhaps we need to look at it again. Perhaps it's not proposed for the pedestrians, but more for the commuting traffic at that particular spot.
Right, I don't think you want an answer for that. That was a comment, really, wasn't it? Steve, John?
I know that we say that the officers find no problem with the roundabout and the transport links. If you go to page 61, it seems to suggest that Gwent Police would have problems with it. In fact, it says, I would suggest that without an appropriate traffic management plan in place, Gwent Police would not be supportive of this development. Have we at all liaised with Gwent Police, or where do we stand on this?
Yes, I mean, Gwent Police are very much concerned about the transport assessment that's been submitted and the potential for more incidents on this roundabout. But the difficult position that your officers find themselves in is that Welsh Government, who are the Highways Authority for the trunk road, are not objecting, subject to various bits and pieces being secured with the developer. They are of the view that the applicant's transport assessment, which concludes that 60% of users are already on the trunk road network. So in terms of the additional traffic movements, they think that they're subject to some mitigation, that the roundabout can cope with that. Now, obviously, that distinguishes Welsh Government's jurisdiction, which is for trunk road traffic users, and your local highways officer's position in terms of local traffic and local users, and the concern is for safety of non-car users rather than car users. But Gwent Police certainly have been consulted. They're not happy, but it's very difficult for your officers to agree with that in the face of Welsh Government raising no objections, subject to bits and pieces that can be negotiated.
The Highways Officer, you don't want to come in again?
Thank you, Chair. No, I got nothing to add to that. Thank you.
Next on the list is Stuart.
If you vote in favour of having an Aldi on that site, I won't comment on this, you will have an Uber Tesco effect. Because I want Rob Murray to comment on this because I think I've got the right view on this. The Aldi in Cwmbran and the Aldi in Abergavenny, because that's the two nearest ones I know, are both sited in town centres. That will in effect be an out-of-town shopping centre. So if you vote to have an Aldi there, you remember that in Pontypool, and I sat in Pontypool for 10 years as a community worker, you've got Tesco's, farm stores, farm stores, Iceland, a lot of stuff there. You've just had that market done. If you've got that Aldi out there, all your drivers will be driving out there. That is your problem, as well as the stuff we've been talking about. That is what the long and the short of this is all about. So you vote to have that out there in its current location, as well as the 40% of people that can't access it by pedestrian means. Your large number of motorists will all go out there. Have it in the town centre, you've got it there. That's all I'm going to say, because I'm certainly not going to vote to have it out there.
Right, thank you. Richard, you are next.
Yes, Madam Chairman. It appears that the applicant has rejected certain sites within, if I say, the larger perimeter of the central business district of Pontypool. We live, and they have rejected these sites mainly due to spatial considerations. While we live in the 21st century, cannot we as an authority work with the applicant to actually construct a building which, say, contains an underground car park beneath the actual retail space, and then some of the spatial constraints will then be ameliorated.
That's the thought. Does anybody want to answer that?
The advice is that the applicant should have thoroughly assessed all the sites. Specifically in terms of mileage, I don't think they've thoroughly assessed all sites. In terms of your proposal there about a site that Undercroft car park in that makes it spatially acceptable, we can really look at that. The applicant suggested one of them which is no longer available, which is the former sort of court area. There may be other areas in the town centre the council owns, which would involve a conversation with the council's asset management team about whether that's acceptable. But in terms of the planning policy's tests, consequentially, it needs to be suitable, available and viable, and you'd need to go through those tests to see whether an Undercroft car park is viable. It's something that could be considered if the applicant was willing to do that.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you very much for that succinct answer.
The next on my list is Gaynor. You don't want to ask a question now? Okay. Any questions or comments from anyone else? Neil?
Yes, Chair. Could you tell us exactly where we can go today now? Is there a possibility of perhaps deferring this application and allowing the applicant to work with our officers and look for any other sort of alternatives? Would we be allowed to do that in today's meeting or not?
Well, I'll ask if anybody wants to comment on this. Richard?
I think the offer's already there. We're happy to work with Aldi on looking for an appropriate site. The application before us is on this particular site that I think is very concerning. And so members are being asked, I think, to make a decision on this site. Bearing in mind, we are happy to work with Aldi's on any alternative sites.
Thank you. Janet?
This is a particularly difficult decision to make. We seem to be between a rock and a hard stone. Whilst we want to encourage artists to come in to give people the freedom of choice, and also particularly families on lower incomes, I do share the concerns for our highways officer regarding the safety of the accesses. So it's really personally a very difficult decision for me to have to make, and I would welcome if we could defer this to have more information on how we can work together.
Yeah.
Yes.
Is it possible to defer it?
I'm not clear on what... in terms of this application that's before us, the applicant is entitled to a decision. If you defer this application, I'm not quite sure what you're asking us to do. Are you asking us to look for additional alternative sites, which we have done, and we are open to all these to have a look at those sites to see if they can work. One of the prime issues is the timing of some of those sites. They won't necessarily come forward immediately, but we are open to do that. But I think members need to be making a decision on this application. The applicant can appeal against non-determination if members don't make a decision within a specified period. So I think the issue of working on an alternative site is fine, and we can do that. But I think that members are being asked to make a decision on this particular application. If further information is required, although I would say this is a comprehensive report, we've looked at this for quite a long time. We've got, as I said, specialists helping to deal with the retail side of it. I'm not sure what other information that we'd be asking for, but if members wanted further information, if they could ask for what that information was.
Can we have further information on the actual pedestrian links and the proposed consultation with the farm or whatever they're going to do?
A point of order, please, Madam Chair. Surely members of this committee should be given the vote first on whether to accept or reject the current proposal before they start proposing any wording for any motions for any follow-up actions?
I asked the officer for advice, and that's what he's given advice. We have to make a decision on this planning application. But it doesn't mean to say we're against all these or anything. There is a future. We can go into discussions. Okay. Gaynor?
I would just like to comment on what Stuart has said about being frightened about destroying the town. The people with the cars at the moment, they do go into Tesco's, fill their boot and they drive away. That is what done a lot of devastation to the town when Tesco's first moved from the street up into where it is now, was devastation for the town. It's happened, it's done, and there's nothing you can do about it. But exactly the same, doesn't matter whether you put Aldi's by the job centre or you put Aldi's down the road. The people that want to go to Aldi's, they'll go to Aldi's.
Cumbra's different. Cumbra's a new town, totally different, and we should forget Cumbran in that respect. Look at what they're doing in Abergavenny, because we're so much more like Abergavenny, really, in a lot of ways, and that's the model you should look at in a lot of ways. If you could have something like the Abergavenny Oldie, which is a brilliant store, and I wonder whether we'd add a site like that, I must admit, because that's doing very well. But put it out on that roundabout, out there, and you've got 40% of people lost. And that was my only worry. Sorry, again, I didn't mean to say, you know, I know you do a lot of it. Yeah. I know you do. I've worked there for a year, 10 years, you see. But I just, how we get round this quandary, I think we're all looking at that one.
Right, I'm bringing the highways officer in again. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Chair. If I could just explain to members something about linked trips. For instance, if Aldi was in Pontypool town centre, you would get a lot of linked trips, i.e. somebody would drive into Pontypool with their car, they would park up, and they would shop in Aldi's, they would shop in farm foods, they would shop in other areas, they would walk to the bank, they would walk to another shop, they would do all their shopping within that town centre, i.e. everything is linked together through that one trip. When you get stores which are out of town, the opportunity for linked trips are very, very scarce. What you would hope to catch there are pass-by trips, which would mean you would catch 60% of the trips, but the rest of them, i.e. the walkers, the public transport and the rest of it, couldn't get there. But in the town centre, you get the linked trips, you would get a car-borne person going to 4 or 5 different shops, outlets. You would get people coming in by bus, you could get people coming by car, and you could get people coming by cycle. So that is the best scenario that you can get. The scenario that we've got at the moment and what is proposed is this place being in an island situation where you only get a certain percentage of people passing by in their car, calling in to do some shopping, which is not the sustainable best argument that you can make. The best argument is for it to be in a town centre location where you can link all those trips together. That is just some advice for members regarding trips to a particular place, car-borne elements, walking, cycling, and all the rest of it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Paul. Craig?
Yeah, just to add to Paul's comments there about linked trips, that's why the planning policy is about, in terms of site selection, is town centre first, then edge centre, before outer centre, and the reason for that is to try and increase linked trips. So by putting it close as possible to town centre, you're likely to encourage people who use Aldi to also use the town centres, other services, other shops, hairdressers, other type of services, the market for other specialist things. There's likely to be a more propensity for that to happen if Aldi's will be located closer to the town centre. Yes, there will be an impact on the town centre. Irrespective of location, it's going to be worse out there because you're not getting those linked trips. But if the Aldi's was put closer to the town centre, yes, it would stop some people going from Cwmbran that would likely to stay in Pontypool and also do long linked trips. There would be a double benefit there. By putting it out on the Trico site, it's inaccessible to foot. it's only going to be people sort of going in and going out rather than also doing link trips, which is what we're trying to do here.
Right, Hugh?
Yes, thank you, Chair. We're focusing again on the pedestrian access. The applicant has already said they're willing to work with the council as part of the planning process to try and improve the pedestrian access. To be honest, I don't think people that don't have a car, that live in Pontypool, are going to walk 1.5 miles to go to Aldi's to do the shopping. I think that those that can afford it will take a taxi, like I've seen other shoppers doing in the Aldi's in Cwmbran. Those that are footbound and have no other means of transportation are likely to be the ones that will shop in the Pontypool town centre. The Highways Department didn't have any objections as far as I was concerned looking at the report, other than possibility of pedestrians crossing the road. But there are a number of existing underpasses already in place, and this idea about linked shopping is pie in the sky as far as Pontypool's concerned. Forgive me, there's been tens of thousands of pounds spent on doing up that market. It's not even at 50% capacity. It's been a decline of the town centres, and Newport went the same way. And unless you're going to propose very large-scale, radical redevelopments of the whole town centre on the scale of Newport, where you can attract in some very large-scale retailers, it's just not going to happen again in the town centre. You're not going to bring in, if you want to get people to have linked shopping in Pontypool, far more needs to be done in Pontypool to bring in large retailers. And that's just not happening because they're all out of town. So I think it's a pipe dream. I think it's pie in the sky, unless you've got millions and millions of pounds to redevelop the whole of Pontypool.
That's one way of looking at it, I suppose. But does the highways officer want to come back in about the pedestrian footpaths? Because I don't think that's possible really here.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's clear in my section of the report that there's 3 pages within that report about the unsatisfactory pedestrian links to this proposal. I don't want to labour the point, Chair, but there's substantial evidence within my section of the report as to why the pedestrian links or links for other than cars are unsatisfactory. Thank you, Chair.
Anybody ready to propose something?
I propose the motion, the recommendation be approved. The application be approved. I'm sorry, to go against the officer's recommendation.
Is there a seconder?
Can I make a comment then?
Yeah.
Just if members are minded to approve the application, there are some outstanding bits of information. For example, Welsh Government have said that there's extra information they need. Although they're not objecting in principle on the volumes of traffic, there's some more information they need before it can be determined positively. Now, the applicant hasn't done that because the recommendation is currently for refusal. The second issue is there is a concern about flooding from the canal, and the Canals Trust has raised that as a concern. And again, there's been no analysis or assessment of that in terms of flooding by the applicants. And again, the reason is because the recommendation is for refusal. The other thing is then, if members are minded to approve, we would need to look at what conditions are necessary and any potential 106s. So if the vote is that members are minded to approve, I would have to suggest that members then allow the application to be deferred and come back to committee once that outstanding information has been done. But again, I must emphasise and caution members that policy-wise, these policies have been adhered to for many, many years. We've always opposed the out-of-town shopping on the basis of the sequential approach and impact on the town centre. This would be contrary to the what we have done previously. So again, I endorse, make sure members take that into account.
Stuart, yes, you can come in.
Can I ask you whether this is against your town centre policy? That's something I just wanted to find out. You just raised a point there.
Please don't interrupt, Lenny.
Just clarify, you've seen the reasons for refusal, and our policies are in the reason for refusal, and we are saying they are contrary to our town centre policies, our retail policies.
Right, we've had a proposal to approve it and it's been seconded. You ready to vote? And this is to approve the application. Can we vote? How many in favour of the proposal? One. Of your proposal? 1, 2, 3, 4. That's 5. Is that right? I counted correctly. Those against the proposal? 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's 8, is it? Against it? Any abstentions? Right. So this application has been refused. Do I have to? Yeah.
For the sake
Do we
of,
have to go to the substantive motion now?
I would, Chair, to
Right.
get things absolutely clear for all concerned after a long debate, yes.
Right. Pardon?
Now we have to go back to as it stands. Yeah.
The substantive motion as refused.
Sorry, Chair, yes. That motion by Councillor Bevan has been refused, so we're back to the officer's report, and I think now what's required is for a member to put forward a motion in accordance with the officer's recommendation, which is for refusal, and for that motion to be seconded, and then for the committee to take a vote on that.
Right, thank you. You are proposing refusal, the officer's recommendation. Is there a seconder for that? Right, thank you. Right, are you ready to vote on that now? As to refuse the application? To those who want to go with the application, I was to refuse it, if you put your hands up. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's 8 again. This application has been refused. Right, thank you. Sorry, we go to agenda item 9, which is application number 17/P 0608. And the proposal is for 2 number new dwellings and is sited at land adjacent to Elizabeth Road, Tallawain, Pontypool, Torvine. And it's on pages 89 to 106, and Claire Hall now will give us a presentation. Thank you, Claire.
Thank you, Chair. No updates to the report, members, so just briefly run through the proposals. This is the application site, which is to the south of Elizabeth Row. This is on the sort of periphery, if I can call it that, of the extended urban boundary that's been designated to take account of the British strategic proposals. So the proposal is for 2 detached dwellings. One is quite substantial, as was referred to in the report. It is included a form of annex dwelling, annex to the dwelling, which potentially might be used for bed and breakfast. But it's effectively two dwellings. It's just one is more substantial than the other. And they are proposed on that field immediately to the south of Elizabeth Row. There's some sectional information just to show the position. This garage here, I'll show you now in the photographs, so you can see that the dwellings will be much higher than an existing garage, which I'll show you as a reference point in the photographs. So that's a view of the application site. So this is Elizabeth Row here, and the application site is here, and that's a view of Elizabeth Row from the approach road from Callaway. This is the garage that's referred to in that section drawing. So the dwellings would be sort of in this section here, sort of higher than Elizabeth Row. But again, I've showed you in sectional, in elevation terms, this is a view from the promenade. So you can see this is Elizabeth Row. These are the two detached dwellings that were approved some time ago, that's also referenced in the report, and the application dwellings would be cited in here. Recommendation is for refusal in accordance with the report.
Right, any questions, comments from members? Who?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Going back to the first slide you showed us, and the incline there, as it's on the site or close by the site of the former British, and it was coalfield workings. As part of the application, in your view, do you feel that there would be mitigations needed or being taken to prevent against possible landslip of the tip ends?
Claire.
Thank you. The applicant has submitted a coal mining risk assessment, which is compulsory for development in vulnerable locations such as this. The Coal Authority have looked at that and advised that there's no objection in principle, obviously subject to the normal due care and attention from a construction point of view, but there is no issue as far as officers are concerned with any subsidence or any risk of slip or mining problems with it in principle. The issue is more to do with the application site. This is very, again, similar theme tonight, sort of an unsustainable location really in terms of siting new residential accommodation in advance of the comprehensive redevelopment of the British, at which point the whole infrastructure in terms of servicing, accessibility and all that would be part of the planned redevelopment. We feel that development coming forward of this nature is really taking advantage of the urban boundary designation, but has jumped the gun in terms of the purpose that was behind that from a local plan point of view.
I've got a supplementary, please, Chair. Can we go back to the first slide in terms of the site assessment? No, the photograph of the site. Yeah, if you look, there's a large bank of loose chippings up there. Now that would be immediately just behind where the proposed dwellings are due to go. Now, I'm not an expert, but given the history we've had in Wales over the decades with, unfortunately, tragic accidents in the past on sites where there's been former coal workings and slag heaps like that loose embankment all the way along the back there. If we had significant amount of rain, I think it's fairly likely that embankment there would be in danger of movement. But to address the point that you made in your earlier answer just now as well, it seems to me that the objection that you're raising to this is a timing issue, because when members voted to pay for the site of the British, it was envisaged that there would be an element of new housing that would go on that site anyway, after reparations were made to things like existing mine shafts and pits and possibly piles of loose chippings like that as well, to make the site safe. So is there concern, the fact that this work is being undertaken before the site is being made safe, or is the concern, in effect, just the fact that he's jumped the gun and got a planning application in before Torfaen have had deep deliberations on the development of the whole site?
All right. Rob's going to answer that.
Yeah, just in relation to this application, the site is included in a comprehensive strategic action area for the British, and basically the details in relation to that policy is basically a development framework for the whole site should be prepared to show how development, if development is going to go ahead there, where and how that's going to be arranged. The urban boundary was drawn around that to allow any potential schemes to come forward surrounding that. Now, we haven't got a comprehensive development scheme for the British yet. It might say that there are significant developments to go ahead there. It might say that there aren't. It still hasn't yet been determined. And I think the application, again, has jumped the gun because it needs to be part of the comprehensive development of the British. And on its own, individually, it's unsustainable development. It may be, can be potentially form part of a sustainable development if and when we see what the proposals are for the British. But as I say, those are not yet being formed. There is currently work going on internally with the working group of the community of the British there, looking at land reclamation proposals and potentially developments maybe stemming from that. But as I say, that's still early work yet. And so this application, we believe, is premature in advance of those proposals and contrary to the policy which says that.
Just a small point,
Yes,
Chair. I'll be
okay,
very
yeah.
quick. With this application, now, this is on privately owned land, is it, rather than Torfaen owned land?
That's correct, yes. Not all the land within the strategic action area is part of the council-owned British development, but it's the whole wider area is being looked at as to not just purely on land interest base, but what is the best way the development in that area can be brought forward, not based on land interests, but as I potentially would incorporate other private landowners in development opportunities coming forward.
Sorry, can I just add, the applicant actually doesn't own all the application site. There's a part of the site that... The applicant doesn't own all the land that's within the red-edged application site. There is land within that he does not know who owns it. But he has obviously undertaken the publicity that's required in the event that you don't know who the landowner is. But he alleges to own some of the site, but not all of it.
The concern I've got is that we would be setting a precedent for any applications surrounding the site until Torfaen had concluded its strategic development plan for the site. And I would not like really to, because we don't know exactly the timescales for when that will be completed, to really effectively prohibit any development in and around the site until such time as that comprehensive review has been undertaken. So if it was just on that basis alone, I would be going against the officer's recommendation. However, I do have concerns about the ecology of the site, looking at the gradient and looking at those chippings, and unless there were significant mitigations included as part of the application to redress that in terms of retaining walls or but I mean, it's beyond the level of my expertise, but it would need to be a full ecological site survey to undertake a risk assessment and what mitigation measures would be necessary. But I am concerned about the possibility of setting a precedent for other planning applications until such time as we've completed the comprehensive review of the site formerly known as the British. Thank you, Chair.
Right. Any officers want to comment on that? Or? Okay, Steve, you want to come in?
Yeah, looking at the report, there's two issues that strike me. The one is the Welsh Water one, we're not connecting to the public sewer. And my other concern is a recommendation by somebody else. There's problems with the water and the water pressure. Can anybody elaborate on any of that?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It just goes back to the fact that obviously that Elizabeth Row is a sort of remnant of a sort of a bygone age, I suppose, and it comes with all the usual constraints that has in terms of modern facilities. The issue, from your officer's point of view, is that the policy requires mains drainage where mains drainage is available. The applicant hasn't demonstrated why that's not being proposed. It is in an area that is served by mains infrastructure, but again it comes back to the fact that once the British is comprehensively planned and redeveloped, then there would be a wholesale improvement to infrastructure in that area, and that's not just water, but that would be highways and other servicing fit for accommodating the additional development that's been identified within the strategic action area proposals. As it is, the application is proposing 2 new dwellings on effectively a substandard situation in terms of modern facilities and servicing.
Back on that, it's only that somebody who actually lives there is saying that the water, there's problems with it when it's being used, it's low pressure and everything else. So my concern is sewer and water together. I mean, there are issues.
Janet?
No. It's an unadopted road, and my concern with the amount of extra traffic that and plant that could be using that if we give consent for this to go ahead.
Mr. Johnson? Highways officer will answer this one. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, Councillor, I share the concern within my report. Within the report, it was that I was concerned about the unadopted nature and the highway infrastructure in this particular area. Thank you, Chair.
Any more questions? Comments? Anybody ready to make a proposal?
Can I propose we refuse the application?
Is there a seconder for that? It's been seconded. Right. You all ready to vote? This is to refuse the application. All those, will they show hands? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's 13, is it? Anyone against? No? Abstentions? So that was unanimous. This application has been refused. Right, we go on to item agenda 10, which is application number 17P0912. Proposal is discharge of condition 3 of application 17/P0340, cited at 5 Bryn Goma, Crossacariog, Combran. Claire is, and these are on pages 107 to 14. Claire is going to give us a short presentation. I think,
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Claire.
Thank you, Chair. Just some updates to the report. We are in receipt of 2 further letters of objection from neighbouring properties, one from number 3 and one from number 14, regarding the appropriateness of the materials, but also raising concerns about the use of potential business use of the premise. I have to remind members that obviously this application was allowed on appeal, which is also elsewhere on this agenda, and this is to discharge a materials condition that was imposed by the inspector. So we're not looking at the development as a whole, just the condition that's being applied in this case. This is the application site. It's a detached property in a narrow access called Bringoma. The proposal, which was allowed on appeal, is for extensions and alterations to the existing building to provide a very modern dwelling. Involves raising the floor space and transforming basically the existing bungalow on site into a modern dwelling with detached garage at the rear. These are the details that have been submitted by the applicant. The design concept for this scheme was clear from the outset. It was shown on the submitted drawings. It was talked about on member site visit and in the report that members considered back in the summer. There's effectively this metal cladding for the roof and then timber cladding for the walls. This photograph here has been submitted by one of the objectors, showing a glare from the existing pool house, which is the basis of some of their concerns to the use of the roof material. In response, the applicant has submitted various photographs to show that same roof material in a variety of residential contexts in different parts of the country, and it's illustrating that it's compatible with various materials: stone, timber cladding, render, etc. So those are just illustrative to show that that this is quite a commonly used material on modern residential schemes, and they're obviously asking for the condition to be discharged on the basis of the information that has been submitted.
Thank you, Claire. We have speakers, objectors to this. Before you come down, I think Tim James would like to give some advice. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, just some advice in relation to the three speakers, I think, which are anticipated in relation to this matter. As Claire outlined earlier, the application before the committee today is purely in relation to the discharge of one of the conditions which apply to this planning permission. And it's important, therefore, that all the speakers realise that any comments they make should be limited purely to the condition concerned and should not seek to reopen previous matters in particular, and should not seek to return to the issue of whether there should be permission at all for the extension and alterations, which has already been allowed on appeal. And if I can just outline the condition which is before the committee today for consideration. That was set out by the inspector as follows: that prior to the construction of the extension and alterations hereby approved, details and or samples of the materials to be used in the construction of the external surfaces of the development, which will include details of the external cladding and roof finishes, windows and glazing, shall be submitted to and approved by the local planning authority. That's the only matter that speakers are to address when they address the committee today. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. The first objector, Mrs. Anne Phillips. When you're ready, Mrs. Phillips, just put the microphone on and Tim James will time you. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm here today once again making my points not as an expert but as someone who cares deeply about the locality, who is pleased and proud to live in Bringoma and who was looking forward to a new permanent neighbour who would give number 5 the facelift it obviously needs to fit in, complement and enhance the local environment. But the applicant wanted a house that's different, not so much different as to stand out at odds with the other properties, sacrificing any ideas that would make it sit comfortably in its surroundings. We now accept that after these months of frustration for all of us, approval for the design has been granted. Nothing further to say on that. The Welsh Inspector's report grants approval, but what was encouraging were her obvious misgivings regarding materials, the key to the project. If, as the applicant maintains, and I quote, "At no point does the inspector cast any doubt that the roofing material is inappropriate," why then did the inspector extend the conditions? Her permission was granted on condition that the materials are approved as being in keeping with the surroundings. Yet inconceivably, in spite of this, the planning officers are prepared to approve without further consideration. The Welsh Inspector was aware of the need for thought to be given to the local environment in the interest of completeness and visual amenity. Her significant use of the term relatively utilitarian to describe the roofing material tells it all. Surely, by giving the responsibility for approving materials back to the local authority, she felt confident that it would be down to people like yourselves, members of the Planning Committee, with the local community close to your hearts, sensitive to and respectful of the needs of that locality, to make the final decision as to the suitability of the materials chosen. Back in July, one major concern of the Planning Committee was the visual impact to which materials are key. The planning officer in her summary, however, says that materials were not specifically mentioned in the reasons for refusal back then. Why was this? Because those of us present at the meeting remember that a recommendation was made by Mr. Lewis that the specifying of reasons could be appropriately left in the hands of the officers. The officers worded the reasons and the materials weren't included. A fact used by the agent when he states that any request to change the roofing material at this stage would be unreasonable. All those present at the July meeting know of the misgivings of the committee members at a much earlier stage. Members of the committee, it can be only right and proper that this final decision should rest with you. The agent describes the appellant as anxious, as are those of us who will be daily confronted by this expanse of metallic industrial-style roof and the surrounding dark grey walls, aesthetically disastrous. The photographs of the proposed roof cladding submitted by the applicant in support of the application did nothing to reassure us and were nothing short of horrifying. The metallic look of the snap lock system, not designed to be attractive, covering the 61.5 square metres of roof sloping down to the lane in a cul-de-sac of traditional houses, hardly the sympathetic and complimentary appearance that the inspector and you, the committee, were looking to. Further photos which we have seen illustrating the use of this material in other local planning authorities are far from reassuring. Modern building developments, rear house extensions, not standing prominently at the front of a very 1950s, 1960s cul-de-sac. Sympathetic and complimentary? Hardly. An acceptable addition to Bringoma with no serious visual harm? The visual impact of this material will be tremendous for all of us who live in and use the lane. It's disappointing that the developer has never understood our concerns. But finally, the agent has said that the developer is not prepared to compromise. Does this mean, then, that whether or not the materials are approved of by you today, he intends to carry on with his plans? A defiant stance. I would, in conclusion, request that this application for the discharge of Condition 3 be rejected. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Phillips. The next objector is David Jones. If you'd like to start and put the microphone on when you're ready, Mr. Jones.
Thank you for this opportunity to speak to you directly. You, ladies and gentlemen, together with our ward councillor, are the only people who have understood our anxieties and given us as residents the feeling of being heard. We have circulated photographs, which I will refer to during this presentation. The last time we spoke on the proposal was July. Amongst other matters, you raised anxieties on building material choices and even cited an example of a pink-painted wall at another Torvine location. Against the advice of officers, you voted to reject the application. On the advice of Mr. Lewis, you did not adjourn, but asked the officers to summarise the reasons for rejection at the next meeting. This delay presented the opportunity for the applicant to sidestep this committee and appeal directly against the council's failure to give notice within the prescribed period. At the planning meeting of August, you were asked to reaffirm your decision. The officer report again recommended approval, but omitted any mention of the concerns you raised in July on the choice of building materials. We had no speaking rights, but thankfully you were unanimously confirmed your rejection of the application. We're disappointed that in November the Welsh Inspector allowed the appeal for the increased height and mass of the structure. The extent of this is illustrated in the photograph of number 5 surrounded by scaffolding. This massing issue is now closed, but the material choice is now paramount. Thankfully, this same inspector identified how critically important the materials cladding issue is to number 5's visual impact. This aspect has been consistently raised by residents, acknowledged by this committee, prompted an additional condition by the Welsh Inspector, but is totally ignored by planning officers. The approved main residence of its pool, garage and outbuilding will represent the dominant feature in Bringoma. Its battleship grey paintwork and utilitarian cladding will be in stark contrast to its surroundings. It is wrong to say that the impact of the second floor roof impacts only on number 6. Everyone driving up and down, and the many people walking the lane, will be struck by the grey appearance and the reflective 60 square metre roof of the lean-to extension facing the lane. Its impact will be most damaging to the home of Mrs. Greenbus at number 3, and there's a photograph of that in the pack. The photographs of the roof planning submitted by the applicant illustrate many of our points. They all have pitched roofs, they're nearly all extensions to existing buildings, and they're in an open space. None are set amongst properties of traditional design. This is the very reason why the previous inspector suggested that the whole footprint of the residence should be further back in the lane. To suggest the inspector's reference to a modern palette of materials meant she endorses all the material choices and finishes is absurd. The lady chose her words carefully and described the choices as fairly utilitarian. The dictionary definition of utilitarian is useful, practical, but unattractive. If she was content, she would not have felt the need to apply an additional condition. Read relatively unattractive. The officers continue to advocate approval without evaluated alternative materials, while the applicant will now not accept any compromise. Composition, slate or lightweight tiles are examples of other cladding options. We are just ordinary residents seeking to reduce the impact on a location we value so much. We have sought compromise throughout the process. We are convinced that this committee's judgment in July was sound, it remains sound in August, and it is more relevant now that the massing debate is over. You are the people with the local knowledge, and you are able to empathise with the locality. Our plea is that this application for discharge of Condition 3 is rejected and that alternative building material choices are applied to ensure that condition 3 is met. It is clear that the submitted materials fail to ensure the proposal is in keeping with its surroundings. Thank you very, very much for listening.
Thank you, Mr. Jones.
I have a copy of, a formal copy of this, and I've also included copies for any of the members of the Planning Committee who care to take one.
Thank you.
Thank you again.
Next, we have the agent, Mr. Lloyd Jones. Thank you, Mr. Jones. Mr. James will time you 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair.
Whenever you're ready. Thank you.
I'm Lloyd Jones, a planning consultant who has been instructed again by the applicant, Mr. Stacey, to speak to you today on behalf of this discharge of condition application. Mr. Stacey is at a loss to understand why this application for a discharge condition finds itself in front of Planning Committee. From the initial application dated 9th of May 2017, my client has worked tirelessly with your officers. He has followed best practice in seeking pre-application advice and gained senior officer support at every step of the process. Some 7.5 months after the plan application was validated and a successful appeal, my client finds what should be a simple application back at Planning Committee. This process has resulted in significant stress for him and his young family and has placed some massive financial pressures on him. Any further delays will compound this. My client fully supports the positive officer recommendation before members today. Members should note that, as your legal officers advised, we are not discussing the merits of the proposed extension, as the Inspector in a recent appeal decision supported the views of your officers and allowed the appeal. When refusing the previous plan application against the professional advice of your officers, the reason for refusal subsequently provided, following an appeal being made for non-determination, was that the design and form of the development would have an unduly overbearing and oppressive impact on the street scene. The application was not refused on the basis that the materials proposed were unacceptable. The plans that were approved by the Inspector had the modern materials clearly annotated on them. There is no reference within the appeal decision that the selection of modern materials was unacceptable, as it was within her power to dismiss the appeal on this basis. In fact, the Inspector's decision provides a clear steer that the materials proposed are acceptable, and she certainly had no misgivings as suggested by the speakers. At paragraph 5 she states, "I also agree that the existing dwelling is poorly designed and somewhat dated, and that a modern palette of materials and a contemporary design approach would be acceptable." She goes on then to say at paragraph 7, in respect to the roof over the middle section that would slope away from the road, it would be constructed with a modern and relatively utilitarian material. However, as it would slope away from the road, it would not be a dominant element of the facing elevation, which would also be softened with timber cladding that would weather naturally. At paragraph 9, she comments, "I also note the various sketches and computer-generated images of the proposal, but from my own observations of the site and its context, I am satisfied there will be no adverse effects on the character or appearance of the area or residents' living conditions. The Inspector therefore gives a clear indication that the proposed materials are acceptable in this context, and even goes as far as saying they would help soften the development. A significant proportion of the roof area is not visible from the street scene, and to install concrete roof tiles on this slope facing Bringoma would be at odds with a contemporary design. It is evident that within the immediate street scene that there are a wide variety of materials from varying eras and no unifying materials, which include brick, render, stone cladding, cedar cladding immediately adjacent, hanging tiles. It is also evident that there are solar panels on the front planes of the roofs opposite, number 6, 7, 8 and 12. In fact, a third of the properties in Bringoma. The proposal will therefore be viewed in the context of modern reflective solar panels that are certainly more prominent in the street scene. I've had the benefit of working in other parts of the country, including areas that are covered by landscape designations, where the use of contemporary materials is positively encouraged. In fact, national planning policy promotes such use. The proposed materials ensure that the property will be a high-quality addition to this streetscape. We fully support the statement of the officers in the penultimate paragraph of the committee report, stating that together with a photographic example provided by the agent of where the same form of roof material has been used in residential situations adjacent to a variety of other finishes, is considered that the submitted materials information is an acceptable addition to the variety of materials that are apparent along Bringoma. Finally, photographs that have been produced were submitted at the appeal and shown to members today that were also before the inspector. At no point in her appeal decision did she consider the materials to be unacceptable. In summary, there is no strong unifying pattern of design of materials in the surrounding area, and there are therefore no sound planning reasons to refuse this application, as it clearly accords with your development plan and national planning policy. My client respectfully requests that you approve this application today and support the professional advice of your officers. My client does not want to incur the additional and unnecessary expense of another appeal. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr Jones. We'll wait till you get back to your seat before the officers answer the questions. Claire, are you going to answer the queries?
I'm not sure there were any queries, Chair.
Right.
Listen to something particular. There's a difference of opinion, obviously, between the speakers.
Can I just
Yes.
just clear up the in terms of the members' debate about the when members decide to go against recommendation, refuse it. We suggested that we draft those reasons for refusal. We based it on what members were discussing and brought that back to members. Although our recommendation remained for approval as it should, members decided to refuse it. But obviously members made that decision in terms of the draft and could have changed that draft. I just wanted to clarify that, that's all. Thank you, Chair.
Who?
Yes, thank you, Chair, for permitting me. After hearing the debate, I was minded to move the recommendation to approve unconditionally as per the officer's recommendation on the bottom of page 113.
So you are moving it for recommendation, the officer's recommendation. Is there a seconder to that? It's been seconded. Now, before we vote, are there any questions or comments from members? Jason?
Yeah, just a comment to give thanks to the two residents who spoke, I think, with a great deal of dignity, a class, and I think they should be rightly proud of the way they've conducted themselves throughout what I'm sure is quite a traumatic process for them and the people who live on Bringoma. I do feel that the planning process has let them down. That ship has sailed, and there's only so much that we can do as a committee.
Any other comments? Stuart?
Have we come out of this process with something better, or was it just came out as we went in? I just wanted to ask that comment, whether somebody can comment on that, please.
Sorry, can you repeat that?
We've been through quite a lot as a committee on this. We do seem to have improved this design a bit, if I'm not incorrect.
Well, yes, I mean, the original scheme, obviously, which members refused, was dismissed that appeal. The inspector shared members' concerns on the mass and impact on the street scene on the property opposite number 6. Obviously, with the revised application, members felt that it still hadn't addressed their previous concerns. But this time, obviously, the inspector disagreed and felt that the amendments that the applicant had made had overcome the previous concerns on impact and therefore allowed the appeal subject to conditions. So, from the authority's point of view, the design obviously has changed from what the applicant originally proposed. This is the scheme that's up there that is what's been allowed on appeal, and we are now being asked just to approve the samples of materials which were clearly illustrated on that plan as being the applicant's intention for this development.
Chair, because I think what we've come out with in this process, bearing in mind what Jason said, which I totally agree with, that we've actually maybe come up with something for everybody, which is something a bit better.
No comment on that, okay. Yeah. Yeah. Right, any other comments or questions from members? Are you ready to vote then in that case? Right. It was recommended to approve unconditionally. Those against? 2 against. Any abstentions? No. 2 against. That application has been approved unconditionally. Thank you. Right, we move on to agenda item 11, which is application number 17/P/0567, and the proposal is for redevelopment of vacant land for residential development, 28 dwellings, and they are cited at Caldicot Way, Pontrhyderyn, Cwmbran. It's on pages 115 to 136, and Helen Smith is going to give us a presentation. Thank you, Helen.
Thank you, Chair. The application we're considering here today is a full planning application for 28 dwellings on land at Caldicot Way. The site currently consists of a vacant site, which has been vacant for quite some time, located off Caldicot Way to the rear of the properties, the flats on Blind Brown Close. Here we have the site layout. You have Avondale Road here. This is Caldicot Way leading to the school and the caretaker's bungalow. There's an existing access and some parking in this location. Here we have 3 blocks of dwellings. This block here is two stories. These are 3 stories, and here we have a block of 4-story flats. This is the elevations of the block of flats. It's actually very similar design to the adjacent blocks of flats on Blind Brown Close. And here are the elevations of the dwellings. Here we have the 2-story block, and then the 2 blocks of 3-story dwellings. Here we have a cross section through. There's the Blind Brown brook that runs through the site. This is actually, the brook itself is a site of important nature conservation. However, the development is offset from that location, and the proposal includes ecology surveys of the site. Here we have some artistic impressions created by the developer. Here we have the apartment block on the site adjacent to the Avondale Way. And here we have the application was actually amended since these were done, and this block here is actually now 2-story rather than 3 stories. Here we have some photographs of the site. Just on the other side of those railings is the brook. Beyond that, then you have the vacant site. Here we have the existing landscaping buffer along Avondale Way, which is to be retained as part of this application. And here we have the existing flats on Blind Brown Close, which back onto the site. A bit dark, I'm afraid. And another view looking up Caldicot Way to the existing flats. And here we have, this is the access road serving the school, and the proposed access for the site will be in this location. The proposal does include some parking spaces here for the school and other users. Oops. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. Right. Any questions from members? Stuart and then Hugh.
As I declared, they're actually in my ward. A couple of, it looks exactly the same as the existing blind branding, right about that. I think we're broadly in favour of it because it's much needed accommodation, to be quite honest. I do have a couple of observations. I know the Bran really well, which runs down the channel there, and your views about it being a lot of nature. It's basically in a concrete channel there. My only concern was about potential flooding. That was number one. Number two was access. It's on the existing road, from what I can see. What I haven't seen, which would be interesting, was seeing the layout, because at the moment you've got you've got a court which goes in, and I presume they're making another court the same. They're quite sensibly laid out, actually. I mean, there's a lot of space in them, very utilitarian. And I mean, a lot of well sought after premises. No objections at all the way they're laid out there. Quite desirable. They're always full occupancy. They're quite desirable buildings. From that point of view, not much I can say about them. And you know, we need them. There's no two ways about them. My other concern is the other side of the Bram. We've got a cycleway. We've got access into the Catholic school, and there's a lot going on over there. That's one thing. The other aspect of this development I am concerned about is we don't have a bus stop, and that whole development. Perhaps you knew this or didn't. Well, I've had conversations with our transport place. The distance between that access point and the bus stop there and the bus stop there is quite a considerable distance, because I've had to walk it before now, so I actually know that. And I have had conversations with our transportation people. That's one thing you might want to see as part of this development. Maybe something could leave her out of it.
Thank you, Helen.
Thank you, Chair. If I can answer the question about the flooding, but if I pass over to Paul to answer the highways issues. This site has been identified as being at risk of flooding for many, many years. And the flood maps which the Welsh Government were in charge of showed it as a Zone C2, which development shouldn't be allowed in those locations. However, there's been some significant hydrological modelling undertaken as part of this application, and it's all been updated. And that showed that actually this site is outside of the flood risk area. The flood risk area does wrap around the site, and they carried out a flood consequence assessment. And as a result, the development advice maps, which shows the flood zones, have been updated as part of the technical advice note for the flooding. So we're satisfied, both NRW and our drainage officer are satisfied the site is not at risk of flooding since the updated hydrological modelling has been carried out. So if I just pass on to Paul.
Thank you, Highways Officer now. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. Thank you, Chair. Councillor Ashley, you'll note, I know that you were aware that recently we improved the cycle footway links to the school immediately adjacent to this site. And it's pleasing to see a site that's located next to a school, so that people in that site can actually walk to school in safety over a short distance. With regard to your comments regarding the bus stops, yeah, they are on Avondale Road, because that's where the buses run, and unfortunately there is nothing that goes on Caldecott Way. So yeah, I know they are some distance away from that, but they are within the recommended limits for bus stops. We didn't ask for any closer bus stops as part of this development, but whilst we would like to get bus stops near particular sites, there are always places where sometimes it's in land which is outside our control. So yeah, I acknowledge that they are a distance away, but they are within a reasonable walking distance. Thank you, Chair.
Can I come back, Chair, very quickly?
Yes.
One, it would be interesting for local members to see about the flooding thing. I presume you're talking about Avon Lwyd rather than the Bran, because there's obviously a flood thing down further, because the Bran's only just, the Avon Lwyd's only just down on the other side of the railway line. I realise where that is. That I presume we're talking about the flood risk area for that rather than the Bran, because it's junctions just down below there. And number two, Paul, what I was on about was Avondale Road rather than going through Codicott Way, really, because there is need for a bus stop there to serve both this development, the adjacent leisure centre, and I do appreciate what you're saying about the school and the cycle path. The only problem we do have on this site, and my colleague Councillor Daniels actually lives in this site as well, funny enough, is the whole business of car parking in the school. It's an issue we do have with this site, which I'm sure you're well aware of. No, I've got no problem with having this development in that sense. It's just that if we had that bus stop there, it might stop some of that as well. And there's a lot of cars in there, but they're very well sited normally.
Okay now, Stuart. And who was next? And then Jason.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I do have some concerns about this. I don't know if you have any photos from the ecological perspective. I can see from the photos that have already been submitted that the proposed development would be pretty much in keeping with the immediate neighbouring buildings. But it is noteworthy in the report to say that whilst the trees are deemed to be of poor quality, the ecological report, and there's two things to this point really. One is normally you would expect details of mitigation and or compensation measures to be outlined in the ecological report and determined to us as committee for determination as part of the planning application process. In this instance, it's got, whilst it is best practice to have mitigation prior to the determination, in this instance it is considered acceptable to condition a landscaping scheme to include appropriate mitigation. It is acceptable to whom has taken that decision. Surely that should be us in planning committee. And whilst it doesn't look particularly startling, this particular site, it is deemed valuable enough to be a site of deemed to meet the SYNC criteria, so a site of importance for nature conservation criteria. And the report goes on to say the proximity is close to the river Avon Lwyd, and there's a corridor consisting of amenity grassland and woodland forming a habitat connectivity corridor. Now these habitat connectivity corridors are vitally important for nature to be able to migrate from one place to another. So I would have liked to have seen a full response from the applicant in terms of the ecology and in terms of the mitigations, particularly with regard to, whilst it says, the report says that this is considered to be a brownfield site, it does support a range of biodiversity and habitat that is not found in abundance locally. So really that habitat should be recreated, reinstated somewhere else if it's not possible to do it on the existing site. I don't think in this particular instance, just by having a bit of green open space and planting a few trees would warrant substantial and significant mitigation to compensate for the loss of this particular habitat.
Right.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, those comments come from our ecologist who advises on the ecological aspects of the planning application. basically, just to give you a bit of background, the site of nature important conservation isn't the whole site. It's actually just the brook. But because the site has been left undeveloped for so many years, it's actually regenerated itself and naturally. And as a result, we asked for the ecology survey to expand, across the whole site rather than just concentrating on the impacts on the existing sink. So, as a result of that, it did show that actually there is some good quality vegetation that's regenerated there since the site's been vacant since previously used for industrial a long time ago. Normally, it is good practice to have this mitigation up front, particularly where protected species are concerned. But we're not looking at protected species in this position. It is just in relation to the vegetation on the site. So it's normal practice for us to condition landscaping schemes, and as a result, the ecologist is satisfied that an appropriate landscaping scheme can be designed up and submitted to us for approval before they commence on site, to take into account the loss of the vegetation that's regenerated on that site. This will most likely include, we have additional tree planting, there's a hedge line to be planted there, and what we're looking to agree is the type of species that they'll be planting, and also the types of grassland they'll be planting in the other areas, and on small incidental open spaces. So we took advice from an ecologist, and he was happy. And we were, if planning permission is granted, we would consult with our ecologist in terms of those details of the landscaping and the species of vegetation proposed, to make sure that it's acceptable.
Want to come in?
Supplementary, please, if I may, Chair. So this area that's deemed to be the sink site is just purely that narrow strip along the brook. That's all there is there on the site currently.
Yeah. It does extend a little bit further up here. It does extend a little bit further up here, I believe. But the whole site itself is not as designated. It's mainly the brook.
Okay, who?
Yes, thank you.
Right. I got Jason next and then Stuart.
Just a quick comment. I think this is an excellent use of the site. It makes use of what I think is pretty derelict land, and I would encourage the developer to identify further parcels of land in this nature, as opposed to the small slivers of land in more built-up areas, such as we debated in the last meeting.
Thanks, Hugh, for reminding me about the Avon Lord down there. The actual Lord from there up to Pontnewid Park is mainly in channel. That is a channel there, Hugh, and it's a concrete channel, and it's quite amazing. I've got lots of photographs of it, and what it's done, it's regenerated itself. I'm quite well aware of what's down there. What I would like, if we can get any 106 money, it would be brilliant to actually do an ecological, because Steve's only one Steve, a lot of us know what's down there, and it would be nice if the developer does put some good stuff in there. There's a school next there, so without getting the kids in the channel, it would be a good project to do some planting and stuff. The school's right next to it, and there's the other thing, and don't groan, there's allotments up there as well, and we've got unadopted paths. There's a lot of stuff that if they want to mitigate again, we other things, Avondale Road, plantings down there, a lot of things that it could mitigate. We'd love to have that. It's a good project. I put a plea in.
Thank you, Stuart. Any more questions or comments? Anybody ready to present a motion? You are recommending approval. I think the officer's recommendation is approve on completion of Section 106 agreement, subject to the conditions. Right, is there a seconder? Thank you. Right, are you all ready to vote? That is to approve this application. 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 13. Anyone against? Abstentions? That's unanimous then. This application has been approved. Right, go on to item agenda 12.
Can I just get in before we start, Mr. Mr.
Okay. Shall I come in, Chair?
Yeah.
Yeah, Councillor Evans, you're a member of the South Sebastopol Steering Group, are you? Right, and is that applied to yourself as well, Councillor Ashley? Okay.
As Community Councillor.
Thank you, and
It applies
yourself,
to
Chair?
me too, but we haven't been to. I haven't been to a meeting for well over a year. I wasn't aware of any meetings.
In that case, members, my advice is, out of an abundance of caution, if you wish to declare a personal interest, that's fine. So I'll leave it up to you on that basis, and if so, remember, please to note it in the register. It'll only be a personal interest.
Thank you, Tim. Right, this application is number 17P0631. And the proposal is for application for reserved matters approved, appearance, landscaping, layout and scale in respect of 181 dwellings, including associated roads and infrastructure, and sited at land west of Cwmbran Drive, South Sebastopol, Pontnewydd, Pontypool. There was a site inspection on the 6th of December. And Helen is now going to give us a presentation. Thank you, Helen.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, members will be aware that outline planning permission was granted for the entire site in 2015. This application just relates to the first part of the second phase. It's reserved matters for the layout and the detailed designs of the dwellings. Here we have, just to give you a bit of context, this is the approved development framework for the entire site. And we're looking at, these are the various different phases. We're looking at this phase here, which is the Wren's Nest phase, but the specific reserve matters application just relates to effectively the first half of this phase here. And here we go, this is a better drawing just showing, this is the Wren's Nest phase, so it's only half of that. As part of the outline planning permission, various matters were already approved at that stage. One of them was the scale and parameters, which is effectively the developable areas of the site. So here we have this phase here. Lost my cursor. There we go. So the application site covers this area here. This is the main loop road through, and access will come through the ravine crossing from phase 1, which members have already permitted previously. Here we have the detailed layout of the development. As I just mentioned, the primary access into this part of the site is from the phases currently under construction. There's a ravine crossing which has already been approved, which leads into this parcel of development. This is the whole concept of the development is a main loop road all the way around the site, going through the 5 different character areas. So this is the main loop road, and then off that loop road you have various streets and mews and courtyards. We also have the southern access at this point here. Now this was approved at the appeal stage. This was approved as a full vehicle access, so that would include cars, buses, bikes and pedestrians. However, although that was allowed on appeal, at the amended outline application, the developers, following discussions and significant concerns from the community and the council, they agreed to amend that access to be bus only, so limiting the traffic from Lowlands Crescent. So we have the bus access will come in up here, and the vehicles to serve these properties will have to access it from the main part of the site. We have two attenuation ponds to deal with the surface water drainage from the site and to take into account the extreme water flows in events of extreme rainfall. Here we have, this site is designed around a village green area. As part of the outline planning application, development briefs are proposed for each different character areas to ensure that we actually achieve those different character areas. This is such a large site. So the development brief for this site has been approved. It sets out the design principles. It also sets out the landscaping for this part of the site. As part of the outline planning application, the strategic landscaping scheme was approved, which also indicated the strategic areas of trees and hedgerows to be lost. The outline planning application was subject to environmental assessment, and as part of that, mitigation was set out in that document to offset the environmental impacts of the development. And as this is a reserve matters, this application is still subject to those mitigation measures that have been set out at the beginning of the process. This is the updated landscaping removal plan for this phase. Obviously, the strategic landscaping has been agreed, but when you come to design your layout, there are little extra areas that will need to facilitate the development. The main areas of additional hedgerow removal and some tree thinning works are around sort of the edges of the woodland. Those are not necessarily tree removals. The works are in there mainly thinning and cutting back. The development visa site sets out a contemporary approach to give it a distinct character from the, I don't know if you've seen the development being built at the moment, which is a more traditional approach on phase one. So here are just some street scene elevations for you to give you a sample of what the actual streets will look like. So this is the main street. The character of the area will change depending on what street you're on. You'll have the main street, which will be higher density, leading to lower densities in the sort of smaller roads. And here we have, this is the village green area. So these properties will face out onto the village green area. And these are the smaller, they call them the green lane streets. Now going back to the attenuation tanks, the one for the most southern point, when the application came in, we were very concerned about the significant structure that was going to have to be built because of the different levels of that site. However, we went back to the applicants and they re-looked at the levels, and probably very difficult to see on this. You can just see a very faint dotted line on the top drawing there. They've actually lowered it probably 2 to 3 metres, and by lowering it, it lessens the gradient on this bank, so you get a more natural bank rather than it was a 1-in-1 gradient, which was going to be an alien feature in the street scene. And this part of the site, because it slopes up behind Grove Park, I'll show you some photographs now, it actually will be visible from the street. But the amended scheme, we are satisfied that as they've lowered it, it'll fit into the landscape a lot better. This is the other attenuation pond. This is the other attenuation pond on the site. But given its location, the levels aren't as steep. So we were satisfied with the visual impact of this one. Difficult to take photographs of the site as it's such a large site, but these panoramic photographs to give you the flavour, the character of the area. Obviously, it's undeveloped land at the moment, but the overall site, only 50% of the site is going to be developed. This is the area that I was just talking about where the attenuation tanks. Members who were at the site visit will be aware this is a public right-of-way here, and it's in this area behind where that attenuation pond will be. And because the site rises, and you will view the attenuation pond, which will be grassed, you view it up against the land that rises to the rear, so we're now satisfied from a visual point of view. this is just a photograph then of Lowlands Crescent access, which will be a bus-only access. And just to remind councillors that the outline application is subject to a very detailed and complicated Section 106 agreement with setting out the affordable housing and the recreation payments. All that still applies to this application, together with the environmental statement mitigation as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. Before members go into questioning, we have a speaker, an objector, Mrs. Carol Jacobs, if you'd like to come down now. Right. When you're ready, Mrs. Jacobs, just put the mic on and Tim will time you 5 minutes. Thank you.
Madam Chairman, thank you for the opportunity to address the committee on behalf of Torvine Friends of the Earth regarding Phase 2 of the South Sebastopol development. I would like members to look at the comments that we have submitted. They should be with your agenda papers. Because of time constraints, I try to limit myself to item 2 in my email, but with reference to paragraphs 2, 5 and 6. This is the email of the 10th of October regarding the houses in the long arm of the green space between the 2 blocks of the woodland, as shown on the drawing, if you've got it available, 1040919 oblique P oblique PL oblique 001 2 of 2. And if you can see, there's a long arm between 2 woodland areas. The right, that's it, thank you. The change we are requesting is to remove from the plan the houses located there and place them in the northwest corner of the development, where it is proposed to provide sports fields. This is a change from the framework master plan and may be resisted because of this, but a precedent has already been made in the change of layout in respect of Part 2 of Phase 1 in relation to the houses fronting the canal towpath. Building between these 2 blocks of woodland would remove the dark corridor required by the many species of bats who live in the woods, woodland owls and other animals needing this space for foraging for food to survive. Active badger sets on the edge of the woodland would be severely and permanently impacted as they shy away from any activity which disturbs the ground around them. The dark and rich corner of South Sebastopol is less impacted by human activity than any of the other areas and provides the best opportunity for survival of wildlife seeking refuge from other areas developed or intended to be developed. Removing the houses from this area and replacing them in the northwest quadrant would help homeowners, preventing them having the risk of bats and squirrels nesting in the lofts. And also there is a beautiful view from the northwest corner across the estuary, which would be an asset for them. In this particular point, this long arm, the gradient of the land between the woods is steep. I walked this site with a colleague for 3 hours on 2 consecutive dates, a total of 6 hours, and we really had a very close look at it. We are also concerned at the number of mature trees to be removed, which provide food and habitat, even though they may be not healthy trees. As a group, we wish to see a successful development which works for everyone, including and especially the wildlife. To this end, we do not wish to appear obstructive, but constructive. And our membership of the South Sebastopol Environmental Steering Group proves this. It is very important to us that we can be assured and satisfied that every possible active action is being taken to respect the needs of the wildlife, which will continue to use and live on this site for future generations. We feel that our proposal would ensure that in this location. We therefore would urge the committee to request a revised plan from the developers for this stage of the development. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Jacobs. It's all right, take your time. And the next speaker, I think he's on his way down, is he? Yeah. And the next speaker is the agent, Robin Williams. When he comes, he's coming. Right, thank you, Mr. Williams, when you're ready. And you'll be timed for 5 minutes. Thank you.
Chairman and members of Planning Committee, I thank you for allowing me to address you today. I won't keep you long. Whilst accepting that everybody has a right to an opinion and not being disrespectful to the Friends of the Earth, because we act very well with Carol and her members as part of the Environmental Steering Group for South Sebastopol, I just would like to inform you, members, that the scheme in front of you today has been a subject of considerable liaison with your officers. Your ecologist and the transport engineer, conservation officer and Helen, the case officer, has had considerable input into the details of the layout. As Helen mentioned in the presentation, the proposal complies with the approved development design brief for Wren's Nest and the parameters set out in the strategic landscaping scheme that form part of the outline planning permission. In relation to the specific issue raised by Carol, the ecology of the site has been considered extensively as part of the environmental assessment that accompanies the application, and the site has recently been surveyed for ecological issues. I think it's been surveyed consistently over the last 13, 14 years, so I think we know everything about the site. Therefore, given that the site has also been subject to review by the Design Commission for Wales and is compliant with the host of documents which I mentioned, I ask you, Chair, to urge your committee to approve the application in accordance with your officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll wait for you to get back to your seat before answering any questions. Right, Helen first, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Just to address just a couple of points that was raised by Mrs. Jacob. In terms of this, the request to remove this from the development, obviously this site has got plan permission, which was granted an appeal, and also an amended outline application was approved. So as I mentioned before, The scale and parameters of the site was actually established, so therefore the developable areas and the green areas were set. And the Reserve Matters application has to come in accordance with these details. So this is the extract from the scale and parameters drawing which was approved, and this is the area which was being referred to. Now, as you can see, they've actually done slightly less. The houses actually only come up to this point here as the attenuation tank is in this location. So, unfortunately, the principle of residential development on that part of the site has been established, and therefore we cannot request the applicant to remove the development from that site. But as this was considered as part of the outline planning application, it was subject to the scrutiny of the environmental statement. This sets up the mitigation, and one of those mitigations is obviously looking at the impact on bats. And Mr. Jacob raised the issue of the impact of the development and the lighting on the foraging of the bats. One of the mitigations is actually a lighting strategy, which the strategy for the whole site has been approved. But as part of the outline planning permission, there is a condition for a detailed lighting scheme to be submitted. So the developers still have to comply with those conditions. And we have actually agreed lighting schemes for the other phases that we've approved, where they have to demonstrate that their lighting scheme won't have an impact on the woodland areas and concentrate the light actually on the roads and the properties rather than the surrounding woodland. This minimises the impact on bats. And in actual fact, NRW haven't raised any objections to the scheme, but they did reiterate that the importance of this lighting scheme. So the developers will have to still comply with this. In terms of relocating this part of the site onto the northwest quadrant, I believe that Friends of the Earth are talking about this area here. Now, this part of the framework for this is this phase hasn't come forward yet for consideration, but as part of the strategy for the site and the Section 106 obligations, 2 rugby pitches are proposed in this location to provide the necessary recreation facilities for the development. So if we did locate it to that position, there wouldn't be sufficient recreation facilities for the development, and it wouldn't comply with the outline planning permission. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Helen. Any questions? Stuart?
Again, as a local member, I've got a couple of observations because I've had problems with development at the moment, and I want to make sure they don't happen again. One is footpaths. If we're going to shut any footpaths, I want to make sure that they would like to make sure that they don't get, if we're getting alternatives, that they're actually walkable. I think I probably do meet a declaration. I'm also a member of Local Friends Earth Group, which I should have done as well. I'm not in on this discussion either, so I'll say that because I don't know what Carol did on this. But that was one problem we've had with footpaths, and I didn't do the visit, but I do know that path quite well. So if we shut footpaths, and please do not shut things unless we have to. That was a conversation I had with the footpath officer. Same problem with the canal. The canal's not involved with this, but there's certainly footpaths through it. The other point I wanted to make, which is regard to what the ecology officer said, and I'm again on that steering group, and he makes a very strong point in here, which I think we do need to bear in mind on, which I'd like to comment on, and it's about he makes it's noted that South Sebastopol development Wren's Nest Farm will result in short-term loss of a number of key habitat features. Several hedgerows will be lost, as well as impacts on peripheral woodland. An area of neutral grassland will be damaged to facilitate the installation of an determination tank, which is what we're talking about. Without mitigation, these losses could be unacceptable. However, mitigation measures detailed within the statement are appropriate to future impacts. He also draws our attention to badges and the sets, the license and things like this. So obviously there's a lot going on here, which you've also said. The other thing is I did actually have 2 about 6 months ago or so, walked all this site, most of it looking at possible TPOs. Is there any chance that we can get the TPOs done on this site? Because I haven't had much of an answer back on that, and it is a concern of Mrs Jacob and other residents which are in my ward. I think we need to know which of those, and notifiable hedgerows, because obviously we don't know what they are. I'd like to know what they are, and they're not mentioned in this at all.
Thank you, Chair. Right, just in terms of the footpaths, yes, there are some, quite a few right-of-ways currently going through the site. The developer has been in discussion with our public rights-of-way officer. We do have a plan, which I haven't got on the presentation, I'm afraid, showing the diversions that are proposed. But the main public rights-of-way through the site, there we go, obviously the one that we walked on a site visit, currently goes up here and through the site up to this point here. This one, that public right-of-way is proposed to be diverted, so it's the same access, but into the, these are areas of important grasslands which are to be retained. The public right-of-way will carry on going up here, and where it enters a development, the layout's been designed so that I don't know if you can just see, there's a footpath here leading into the village green, and the concept is that to try and retain the natural character of that public right of way, rather than being on the hard, footpaths of the roads, to try and actually keep it as a separate public right of way. There's also another one coming down from here. It currently goes down there and across there. And this is to be it's not a significant diversion on this one, but again, it's to try and keep it a natural experience for the walkers rather than on the hard edge of the highway. They built, even if plan permission is granted, they still have to go through the diversion orders through our public right-of-way officer, where they have to consult and go through the legal necessities. Can't speak. The legal requirements of that procedure. In terms of the ecology's comments, obviously our ecologist has been very heavily involved with this right from the very beginning, and as part of the outline, the environmental statement, yes, there obviously is an environmental impact, but the environmental statement sets up the mitigation. Now this is only a small part of the site, and the mitigation covers the whole site. So it may be that some of the mitigation for the tree replacements and the landscaping will actually also be provided in the next phase along. But he is happy that the appropriate mitigation, as long as it is all fed through into these detailed schemes, which is what we are achieving, he's happy with that. In terms of the licence, in terms of the badges set, there is a condition on the outline plan and permission requiring that where a licence is required from the Welsh Government for protected species, they have to provide us a copy with that so we can be satisfied that they've got the right licences in place. In terms of TPOs, yes, we are hoping to put, we are planning to put TPOs on the trees which have been incorporated into the development, particularly obviously particularly the main ones as part of the village green. I believe that we are working towards that. There are some resources issues that we have at the moment, but we are on top of that and in that process.
Would that include the ancient hedgerows that we've got going through there as well? I presume you can do a TPO type border on them as well.
Can't on hedgerows. TPOs just cover trees, but as part of the conditions require the development to be carried out in accordance with the strategic landscaping scheme and the detailed landscaping schemes. So and there is condition that if they are removed or destroyed, they do have to be replaced. And these areas will be managed by the management company for the site. And the environmental steering group has an input into this management plan for the site. So the hedgerows won't be incorporated into residential curtilages. They will be kept as a communal resource, and the management company have control over that, and obviously the steering group have an input into that, as we do as planning officers. So we do have the mechanisms to protect those through this planning permission. We can't actually designate, protect them through TPOs like we can with trees, but we're satisfied that the necessary provisions are in place to enable us to protect them. If they are damaged for some reason, we have got the mechanism to ensure that they are replaced to an adequate standard.
Thank you, Helen. Hugh and then Janet.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I have a couple of questions, actually, please. I'll try and bring this microphone round a little bit because I do need to speak to the map. I do need to look at the map as well. This area to the bottom southwest, where the grassland is that's the area that's categorised as NG5, is it in the report? Because I noticed there's circumference as well that goes further up around the northwest and all the way around the perimeter to the northeast. Is that area also classed as, I presume MG is mature grassland, but I'm making an assumption there, so correct me if I'm wrong. And will those areas that are shown on that map within the red line be protected from any future further developments? So they will be retained as green spaces. And the other question, second one, ties in with what Councillor Ashley was saying about the hedgerows. I'm assuming on that map there, the green splodges are trees and the brown linking bits of the hedgerows. Are those hedgerows in brown, if that is indeed what they are, going to be retained? And my third question really is regarding these large ponds for water collection that are going to be covered. In the report it says that there's going to be a loss of grassland, but it's going to be banked, and that it will effectively be replaced by the structures that are going to form lids on these ponds. So I was trying to get a bit more information on that and how that would work, please.
Thank you, Helen.
Thank you. Yes, right. These two fields, they are designated as MG5, which is a species-rich grassland. So basically, they've been grazed in a particular way over many years, which meant that there's actually a lot of species within types of grass within those areas. So this was picked up all through the whole design process, right from the beginning, from the environmental statement. It identifies that is an important rare habitat that needs to be protected. There is actually, they are putting some attenuation tanks under here, which will require some disruption of the grasslands, but we have had a method statement in terms of how they're going to take the grass, install the tanks, and then replace the grassland, and then replant where needed to encourage that to not have a long-term adverse impact on the grasslands. Our ecologist is satisfied with that method statement. These areas up here, they're not MG5, but they form a very important part of the concept of the whole site. If I go back to the framework, you can see the whole design of this site was to keep these important ecological connectivity from west to east in these areas. And the area that you have just pointed out is this area here, and it does form an important part of the open space and the green spaces. So that hasn't, in terms of scale and parameters, you can see up here, there's no development proposed on that part of the site, and they form part of the green spaces, which will be managed by the management plan and the management company. So they were, there's no proposals to develop these areas. Should the planning application in the long term, in the future come forward, and obviously we would resist that, given that it forms a very important ecological feature of the site. Owen Ponds. They're actually not closed ponds. They are open. I take it back to the sections. They are, I don't know if you've seen them on the phase 1 that are being developed at the moment on the corner of the bottom part of Station Road. They are open. They will, in peak flows of water, they will fill up with water. But when there's no rainfall, they will be empty. But the banks, they will be grassed over, so they will appear like an undulating structure in the landscaping. So they're not going to be closed, not going to have a sort of lid on it. They will be open features, and you will get plants growing within the basin, which will be visible when it's empty. Obviously, when it's full of water, it'll be a pond.
Please, Chair.
Okay.
Can we go back to the map? Just one final little one for clarification. Yeah, it was that one there. So it's probably easier if I point. So you mentioned the pond was going to be there, but you've got that area there and that area there. So I'm wondering, is it going to be there, or is it going to be there where the grassland is?
The drainage strategy for the site, you've got a mixture of attenuation. So the water needs to drain from the site into the watercourses, but at a greenfield rate, so a slower rate of runoff, so that it doesn't cause any flooding or any issues. To achieve that, you have to have attenuation. And there's different forms of attenuation that you can have. The two proposed on this site, it's a mix of the ponds and underground tanks. These then, in peak flows, will fill with water, but there's a mechanism to limit the rate of the water's discharged into the adjacent watercourses. So these two are actually the open ponds, and in this area here, it's going to be an underground tank. So when they actually install the tank, in accordance with the translocation of the grasslands, the method statement, you won't see anything on that. They are all underground crates, which are designed to store the water and let it out at a gradual rate.
Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. Here you've spoken. Janet was next.
Mine's only a quick one, Helen. I observed that you've got ponds there, and looking at the information I have in front of me, there is a footpath near there. Is that a possibility that, under consideration, that could be detoured to another part? Because obviously there will be children on that area, and my concern is when these ponds fill up, children and water attract. Is any sort of safety aspect we can ask the developers to put in?
Yes, please, Helen.
Yes, currently there is a footpath running through there. This will be diverted to go around this way. Here you have quite a significant belt of trees, so they won't be going into this part of the site. The public right away will go this part of the site, so that will be segregated from there. Obviously, they have to get technical approval of all the details, but and a safety audit will be done by our drainage officer in terms of any fencing and any safety facilities. So he will be looking at that.
Thanks, Helen. That was a concern. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Stuart?
But currently, the photograph you showed us before with the little bungalow and where you walk the footpath, currently that stream goes down the side of there. That bungalow there, that stream's the one that goes down there, isn't it? So is that going to be the water out of that stream, or is that land drainage we're talking about going into those sanitation ponds? Because what we've got coming down off of that site, you've got that stream, if I remember rightly, is the one that goes down in the middle, down and just before you get to the tunnel, isn't it? There's a whole lot of these streams come off the mountain and they run down. The Bran is the one further down by Pontywood Park. Sorry, it comes down by Five Locks. You've got a whole series of these streams that all drain the mountain. They're quite important because what they do is why we've got the ecology on there is because of these streams. Some of them also are canal feeders, and my colleagues from the Modern Brett would love to get their hands on some of the water there. So, in fact, we've got a water problem as well. Put my other hat on. I wonder sometimes whether developers have had a conversation with the boys from Modern Brett, because Mark, what's his name? Because some of that water would be quite valuable in there. Not that. So I just wonder why we're doing that to some extent.
Thank you. Yes, it just brought up this plan to show you that watercourse. That's the watercourse you're talking about, I think, isn't it? Which actually it runs to the southwest of that bungalow. But yes, the attenuation tanks will outfall into those watercourses. You are right, the site's covered with watercourses coming off the mountain, and many of them feed into the canal. As part of the outline planning application, the environmental statement assessed all these watercourses and assessed the impact that development would have on them. Some have got crayfish in them, so we didn't want to divert them, as otherwise that would result in them drying up and having an impact on that species. So the environmental statement has taken all that into consideration, and the drainage strategy is an important consideration. The water that will fill the tanks and the pond will be the surface water runoff from the roads and the houses, basically, the hard surfaces of the development. In terms of the canal, we've actually secured a canal water management strategy where they had to make sure that the sufficient levels of the water in the canal were maintained and that the development didn't cut off any watercourses or add to the water to the canal. And the Canal Rivers Trust are satisfied with that, and that has been approved. Thank you.
Any other questions? Who again?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'll be very quick because it's something I thought of during the last answer. As a member of the Cleaner and Greener Oversight and Scrutiny Committee meeting, this issue with trees is very topical and has also been in the news today with the Welsh Government. As I mentioned earlier, we've lost 1.2% of the tree population within Torfaen over a 3-year period. I'll be very brief, but the committee has made a number of recommendations to the executive, which would not just recommend a 2-for-1 replanting, where there was new proposed developments that involve cutting down existing trees, but to try and address the problem that we have with the decline in the number of trees within the borough. Overall, we're still doing pretty well in the whole of Wales. We're averaging about 24% versus 19%. So we're still one of the greener boroughs. But one of the things that's being put forward to the executive for consideration is the tree replanting scheme. And the benefits of trees are often overlooked because they can reduce pollution as well, and in terms of water courses and water attenuation are quite significant actually in terms of the water take-up. And it was on the Welsh News today. It's all about the right species being in the right place. So that was the point I was going to make, and the follow-on question from that is, could we not, as part of this proposal, considering planting further trees to around the southern perimeter of that bottom southwest corner to assist us with the water course management situation?
I think I've been on this committee a long time, and usually the officers make sure if any trees are taken down, some are planted. Is this the case in this application?
Yes, it is. Yeah, I mean, obviously, unfortunately, there is some trees to be removed as part of the development, but again, the mitigation from the environmental statements of the landscaping scheme was very important to the site to offset any trees that are lost. So this is a strategic landscaping scheme which was approved, which shows the strategic landscaping of trees along the main roads into around the site. And then as part of this detailed planning application, wrong way, sorry. And this isn't, we have got a landscaping scheme to go with this development, the detailed one, but we do have additional tree planting in areas such as here, and obviously you can see dotted around the site. So there is a significant amount of tree planting as part of the detailed landscaping scheme to offset and actually enhance the development and help it set into its surroundings.
Thank you, Helen.
There's no new tree planting around the ponds and the water courses to assist as part of the water management, though, is there?
No, not in that particular location. The water management it's capturing the water that's generated from the new development, the hard surface runoff. It's not capturing the existing runoff from the site. It's the runoff that's going to be created as part of this development. And so that it has to be taken off the site, which is being done into the adjacent watercourses through that reduced flow, which I explained earlier. But it's in these areas, because of the banks of the attenuation tanks, the ponds, it would be practically very difficult to plant trees due to the levels, and it wouldn't actually achieve helping with the water flow, because of the drainage of the site's been designed to actually fill the ponds up, which will then be released gradually, greenfield rate into the adjacent watercourses.
Thank you. You satisfied, Hugh? Good. Any other questions, comments? If there aren't, is there anyone ready to move? Yeah. Right, thank you. You ready to vote on it? Approve. I haven't said it yet. You're putting your hands up. You are keen. Right. You've moved the officer's recommendation with conditions? Yeah. Right. And you're voting already? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That's 12. Thank you. Any against? No. And 1 abstention. Thank you very much. That concludes the meeting tonight. I'd like to thank the committee and the officers, and just wish you all a very happy Christmas and a happy and peaceful New Year. Thank you.